lot of really good YouTube videos about gel printing in general, but I found that there's not very many that talk or demonstrate about gel printing on fabric. I'm Susan Perney-Mark. I'm a textile and surface design artist, and I've been using the gel plate and fabric in a variety of different ways for many years. And I found in some ways fabric can be a lot more versatile than paper can. You can stitch through it. Well, of course you can stitch through paper, but there's so many different kinds of fabric that you can combine on the gel plate. And in this video, I want to show you 3 different ways to use your fabric on your gel plate. Let's begin with our gel plate. I use a homemade one with gelatin, alcohol, and glycerin. I like it because if I damage it, I can just melt it in the microwave and reform it. And they're easy to clean up. Next, we have our paints. And I find a regular acrylic paint to be the best choice. I don't need fabric paints or textile paints, but I will often use open acrylic paints because they will stay wet a little longer and they're a good source, but they are expensive. Another choice is to use a medium specifically designed to keep the paints wet longer. One of those is the open acrylic, but I also use other mediums that say they extend drying time, and I find those to be perfectly suitable. Next, you can use any of the tools to mark onto your paint that you would use on paper. Here I've got a chopstick, but also using a marker spreader, and of course a rubber brayer is an essential item. In our first project, we're going to look at creating pattern onto silk organza. It doesn't have to be a natural fiber. It could be any kind of synthetic, and it doesn't even have to be a sheer fabric. But we're going to start using that with 2 colors and 2 different steps in it. Our first step is we're going to crease it, put folds into the surface of the fabric. I used a random kind of design or pattern for creating the folds. I wasn't worried about making them straight, but the key thing is to press them well with an iron setting that suits your fabric. Here is one that I've already done, and you can see the folds that I've placed with the first layer of color on this. With the pink on the fabric, I'm going to add a light purple onto my gel plate and spreading it evenly over the surface. Next, I'm drawing the spreader across the surface of the gel plate, making random lines in it, and that way creating some texture and pattern onto the fabric. Carefully, I lay the organza onto the fabric and pat it gently in place. Here, the paint is going to come through, so putting a piece of paper onto it while I'm patting it down is a really good idea. Or you could actually use another piece of fabric as you would scrap paper to pick up some design. Remember, you can treat your fabric very much like you would paper in your gel printing processes. Then I carefully lift the organza up, and you can see the wonderful patterns that are on the surface. You can also do this over many times, just making sure that you let the paint dry thoroughly before adding more color. In the next process, we're using organza but also fabric at the same time. The advantage, of course, of the organza is that it's sheer and with the paint will go through both layers, so you get almost like a shadow effect on your piece. Beginning with putting some sky and some grass to create the background, and as usual, rolling the brayer over to spread it all out. I'm not too concerned about having it totally even because I find having texture in the colors adds some interest to my work. Once I'm happy with the design, I lay down the organza, centering it carefully, and then the cotton goes over top. And as usual, I carefully smooth out the wrinkles. You don't want wrinkles in your fabric because, of course, they're going to show white areas. So I smooth it out carefully. Next, once the fabric has dried, then it's time to add your flowers. You could use lots of different colors, try different ways of marking them. What I don't want to do is use my brayer to spread the paint flat. I want some texture and some color mixing happening, and I also want to control how large or small the flowers will get. Now it's time to put the organza back on, laying it and centering it where I want it to lay. Then next, putting the cotton back over, and I'm not too worried about matching it exactly where it was before. As I say, I like the texture and trying to have some movement in the piece. And after I've smoothed it all out, I can pull it back and see the pattern on both layers of fabric. And if you look, you can, oh, and there I'm just adding a little bit more texture. I think the paint was just a bit clumpy there, so I'm smoothing it out with my sponge brush. And again, you want to make sure that you lay them separately to dry, and you can see how interesting you can have that shadow effect by moving the organza just slightly over to one side. And of course, I want to think about adding some additional stitch or perhaps some applique. So here we're on to our third technique, and I've put some of the matte medium on the surface, and I'm just going to add a little bit of green on there and spread it out. I just want again to have some texture happening and so on. And this could be a different landscape, it could be mountains, it could be lots of different possibilities. So you're not limited in any way to create ideas and develop them further. In this case, I'm actually using some old vintage tablecloth with a lovely damask pattern. You may be able to see the woven detail in there, and I'm excited to see if it's going to show through onto the front of our gel printed fabric. Oh, and I forgot to add a few little branches or grasses in there. So just using a little shaper tool and other possibilities. You could add some flowers again on the surface or try different options. And I've laid it down, and again, just making sure I put a bit of paper down. I it's easy enough to get some paint coming through onto your hands here. Now we can pull it back and see what has happened. So I can see that there's a little bit of texture that's come through, and we're going to wait for that to dry. But what's important here is what I want to show you that I've done with it. So here is a piece that I did a while ago, and you can see that I've mixed some blue and some white for the sky. There's a little bit of batting or interfacing behind it to give it depth, but it really is all about the stitching and the flowers that I've added in along with some applique. So think about your fabric as a basis for further explorations. Let's look at some other ideas that you could do with fabric on your gel plate. In this case, it's almost a way of cleaning your gel plate off, because I start with fabric that I scrunch up and iron flat and then place it onto my gel plate, picking up some color. And in this case, I used black first and then orange and a bluey turquoise, but letting it dry after each time, refolding it, ironing it again. And so it's a process that takes a little bit of time, but it's an interesting way that you get some fun patterns happening on the surface. Here's two pieces that I had done with some ginkgo leaves. And you know that with doing other printing with the gel plate, you can play around with ghost images and get some interesting ways of working back and back again into the same piece, adding layers. So in this case, I had the yellow and sort of a blacky purple. So I was also taking these ghost prints and then putting the leaves back onto the surface to add more. And what's best about this on the fabric is then you can add the detail of stitching, and that can be really exciting. You could put contrast stitching or even beads or other embellishments. Now here's another piece. I did a series of these with watercolor background, and in this case I gel printed onto the fabric, and I was using old cotton bed sheets because they have a wonderful texture happening. But instead of using the whole piece as something, I then used it as material for collage, and each of these pieces have been backed with some fusible web and ready for some layering onto the little villages. The little windows are actually stitches, zigzag stitches in black, and then some additional hand stitching. And you can get some wonderful texture happening by going back over, and without cleaning your gel plate, you can pick up some great imagery on there.